Hey everyone, welcome to session 232 of the Behavioral Observations podcast. I have a great show in store for you today. I'm talking to Dr. Aaron Blocher-Rubin, and we talk about providing ABA services as a nonprofit agency. Aaron is the president and chief executive officer of Arizona Autism United, which is a multi-site provider of ABA, and you'll come to learn other therapeutic services. In this conversation, we talk about how Aaron got into behavior analysis, what led him to found the agency he now runs, supporting the family along with the client, and the importance of offering a variety of services. We also spent a considerable amount of time discussing what it's like to work in a nonprofit setting, and we contrast that with other settings, of course. From funding to governance to staffing, we get into the nitty-gritty details. And one can't help but to contrast these settings with private equity-funded nationwide providers, and we do discuss that a little bit also. And Aaron and his colleagues must be doing something right because they were just recently voted the 2023 Arizona Top Workplace, and it was the second time they've been voted the top workplace in the state of Arizona at that. So congrats to those guys. We also spent a little bit of time talking about some of the blog posts that Aaron has done on LinkedIn, specifically talking about what he calls ABA red flags, things that he sees in the service arena, if you will, that kind of worries him. I've put a link to his LinkedIn account in the show notes of this episode, as well as the other resources that we discussed. So you'll want to go to behavioralobservations.com to check them out there. And if you want to get these show notes sent directly to your email inbox, when you go to Behavioral Observations, just sign up for the email list and you'll get these show notes delivered straight to you. Before we get to the interview itself, I want to let you know that we're brought to you today by the University of Cincinnati Online and their online Masters of Education in Behavior Analysis program. It's 100% online and asynchronous. You log in when it works for you. If you want to learn more, go to online.uc.edu and click the Request Info button. We're also brought to you by HRI Recruiting. Yes, you know the deal. If you're looking for a job or if you're a provider looking for staff, just go to hricolorado.com and schedule a confidential chat with Barb Voss right away. And then we're also brought to you by Behavior University, and their mission is to provide university-quality professional development for the busy behavior analyst. Learn more about their CEUs, their workshops, their 8-hour supervision course, RBT trainings, and lots more, along with listener-specific discounts. Go to behavioruniversity.com/observationist to learn more. All right, that's it for opening remarks. Let's get to this fun conversation with Dr. Aaron Blocher-Rubin.
Welcome to the Behavioral Observations Podcast, stimulating talk for today's behavior analysts. Now here's your host, Matt Sikoria.
Dr. Aaron Blocher-Rubin, welcome to the Behavioral Observations Podcast. Great to see you again. How's it going?
Hey, Matt. Long-time listener, first-time caller. Good to see you, buddy. Thanks for having me on the show.
Oh, man. This is fun. This is fun. I remember when, so just for the listener's sake, there's a couple, I just want to let the folks know that you had reached out to me. Oh, man, this has got to be like 5 or 6 years ago. And
that sounds about right.
And you said, hey, if you're going to be at ABAI, let's grab some lunch. And we had a fun lunch. We discovered along the way that we were actually from the same hometown. Yeah. Crazy.
Little small town in Cape Cod, Massachusetts. Who would have thought?
That's right. And so really small world. We talked a lot about podcasting and stuff like that. And I know you kind of dipped your toe into that water for a bit as well. It's been fun to see what you've done out there in Arizona, at least from afar on. You're pretty good about keeping people up to date on LinkedIn, and I encourage. I'll put a link to your LinkedIn profile in the show notes if people want to follow Aaron and see what he's up to. He's always posting really thought-provoking ideas and concepts and things like that. And that's kind of what led us to today's conversation. A while back, Aaron, you started posting about some of the things you've been seeing in the field and so forth. And you had this series of, what we like to, I think what you were calling ABA red flags, if I'm not mistaken. So I really want to get into that. I know you just came back from the Autism Investor Conference. You had some thoughts related to that as well. And so we're going to get into those topics and lots more. But first, I want folks to get an idea of who you are, where you came from. So if you can let us know how you discovered ABA, what made you want to pursue it as a profession, and kind of bring us up to date with, what your day job is these days.
Yeah, right on. And thank you, Matt. And I want to just say too that, when I did reach out to you those years ago, and I had discovered this podcast, I was so impressed by it. The guests you were getting, the conversations you were having, those kind of behind the scenes looks with kind of legends in our field that we just hadn't had before. And I thought that was so cool. And I got inspired, and I wanted to give it a shot as well. And I just thought it was so cool that you sat down with me. You gave me all these tips. You were a mentor to me getting started and sort of trying out a podcast that I did for a couple of years, SR Plus, which has been retired since. I've moved on to other things, but it was a lot of fun. And, you are the podcast king, and it is truly an honor to be on this show. So thank you for
very nice
your leadership and your help over that time.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. There's a lot of great podcasts in the ABA field right now, and so it's really nice to see how people are picking up the microphone and having these conversations and sharing them with the audience.
Absolutely.
So
there's some really
a lot of good
ones.
Stuff out there. Yeah. So just out of curiosity, is the podcast still available? Can you still?
It is still there. Yeah.
All right. So I'll put a link.
What's funny? Like I check the stats every 6 months or something, and it still gets like a couple downloads a week, maybe 2 or 3, but it's just kind of funny to me that anybody still finds it. But yes, it is still there. That
does not surprise me.
There are a couple good.
Yeah. So we'll put a link to that then as well, so people can check that out. So
yeah.
All right.
Well,
so
anyway,
let's hear about how you got into ABA.
Yeah, absolutely. So, for me, I think I've long said that I find people kind of get into this field one of two ways. Either they have a personal connection to autism and they discover ABA, or they get interested in behavioral science and they discover autism. And so for me, it was the former. Autism came into my life when my youngest brother was diagnosed. I was about 18 and he was 2. And I was getting ready to go to college. And so it was all kind of a whirlwind of, what is autism and what does this mean? And is this why he never looks me in the eye? That kind of thing. And I was very attached to my little brother, Andy. And I had a little sister who was a year older, and I'd seen the rapid development that she had, socially and language, play, and all these things. And while my brother Andy was a lot of fun and it's just such a cute little kid, there were some real obvious differences. And the biggest one was just had a very hard time just making eye contact and just engaging with him. He just kind of did whatever he wanted to do. I used to say, back in the days when I didn't know behavior analysis and I only knew Freudian theory, I used to say he was pure id. If you remember super ego, and id, he was just go. But it was pretty clear that, that was going to be a challenge for him if we couldn't get some help. And the problem was that, we didn't know of anything that really helped. He was in some, special education preschool type settings, doing their best. This was in the 90s. So I left New England and I went to college at UCLA. And on the advice of Andy's parents, I took a class with the very well-known Dr. Ivar Lovaas. And I didn't know who he was, but they told me, hey, you should take a class with this guy. He's really a pioneer in the field. And I thought, it'd be good for me to learn more about autism. I wasn't thinking I would have a career in the field, but I wanted to know for Andy's sake. And I was absolutely blown away. And I think anyone who ever took a class with Lovaas would immediately agree. His charisma was off the charts. It was just, we would just be laughing the whole class. He just had this thick Norwegian accent and was just constantly cracking jokes, many of them inappropriate, but just they were all so witty and just insightful and just really opening our minds to this idea of looking at the concept of behavior in a new way, and what you can do to help someone change some very, damaging behaviors, damaging to the self, right? And so that was quite mind-blowing for me. And I basically just kind of kept going. I took he had a course series where we worked in the clinic. We started getting assigned to kids. It was an incredible amount of training and supervision. I mean, that was one thing I'll always remember, is just the layers upon layers upon layers of supervision we got. And it was a different time, and it was a small clinic, and it was, university funded and all that stuff. So it had some unique qualities there, but it really shaped a lot of what I came to know about the field and where it's gone from there. So I ended up leaving California after college. I came to Phoenix. I quickly discovered that nobody knew what ABA was. There was really nobody around who could do it. And all of a sudden people were coming to me as if I was some kind of expert. And, in retrospect, I really wasn't qualified to hold that role. But sometimes when there's nothing else and people are desperate, you just make the best of the situation. And so I just tried to help. And I, helped out a few families, ended up working at a local nonprofit organization, the Southwest Autism Research and Resource Center, or SARC. It was still fairly new at the time, and they had started as a research center trying to cure autism, as many organizations were trying to do back then. I think realized that wasn't on the horizon, and wanted to create some programs to start training families. And so I ended up in this unique role where we started a program that, frankly, we just made up at the time, where families would come in a few times a week. I would work with their kids. It was all on live video feed, and we'd have other staff basically like narrating to the families what I was doing and how we were gaining attention and reinforcing and teaching responses and prompting and fading and, all these kind of sort of basic things. And it was amazing. It to these parents who had absolutely nothing, it was very eye-opening of just what was possible. And it was foundational only. That was really all we could do, was say, we're showing you what is possible. We're trying to give you some tips to work with your own child, and we hope that the service systems get better over time. That experience, I think, created what became my sort of professional lifelong passion, which is trying to get help to the people who need it the most, right? The people who can't otherwise find it, and making that help genuine and focused on their needs, and not just fit to a model that, benefits me or my business or something like that. And so I really, it was the first time I had learned anything about nonprofits, and that just really opened my eyes. And I thought, this is so interesting. We're dedicating all this energy, all these resources, all this information and assistance to people who can't pay for it. And I just started asking questions. How are we doing this? How this is possible? And I learned I learned a lot.
How do you fund it? How do you
pay for it? Like, how are you paying me? Things like that. And it just I found it really interesting to see that I had always kind of been turned off by corporate America, especially back in the 90s. This is before startups were so cool, and the business world was just kind of gross to me, and I didn't have anything to do with it. And so here I discovered this nonprofit thing, and I thought, oh, this is for me. I like this. This is all about giving back, but working hard and doing good work in the process. So I worked there for a few years, and it grew quite rapidly, and I learned a lot along the way. A few years later, back in 2006, I had an opportunity to join forces with some local families and start something new. These were families that frankly just needed better care for their kids. There were, basic level services available throughout the area, but they just weren't good. They certainly weren't ABA at the time. And, it was started on a simple concept of, we have to do better. And it does not seem like the existing provider community is very incentivized to strive for quality and strive for family-centered care. So let's see if we can do it. And that really was the basis of the organization that I now have been running for 17 years, and that's Arizona Autism United, or AZA United. And it's been quite a ride, because during that time, we've certainly grown tremendously. We've been involved at the local level for many different initiatives to increase access to care, public policy advocacy, working with different payers and government systems. And I think as a result of that and many others who've contributed, ABA is now a covered service in our Medicaid plan. And I think we have a thriving community here, and we've, the Phoenix area has received some accolades as, the most autism friendly city and things like that. So, I'm not going to say what exactly that means objectively, but I think the point is that there's a lot here for families, and for clinicians who want to work in a state that's very engaged with the community and the autism community.
I guess directionally, it's better than the alternative, right?
That's right.
You would want to be like the worst,
as,
the city for individuals with these types of needs. Are you looking for a new job, but you're overwhelmed with all the emails that you're getting from various ABA agencies? What if there was someone who was in your corner and could help you find the perfect job placement? Well, that person exists. Barbara Voss has been working as a recruiter for over 30 years, and her company, HRIC, specializes in placing BCBAs in permanent full-time positions throughout the United States. Barbara has been placing BCBAs since 2011, so she knows our business, and she offers personalized service to any BCBA looking for a new position. She also helps companies looking to hire BCBAs too. Here are just some of the things Barbara can help you with. She can provide information about salary ranges in different markets across the country. She can help you write your resume. She can coordinate and prepare you for the interview process, and even help negotiate the right salary for you. And best of all, there are no charges to any candidate for all of these services. When you are ready to make a change and want to work with someone who will listen to you and understand what you need in a new position, contact Barbara at HRIC. To schedule a confidential discussion, head over to hricolorado.com. Again, that's hricolorado.com, and hit the contact button to connect with Barbara. You won't be disappointed. Oh, so where along this timeline did you did you do your graduate training at UCLA too? Did you or did where did you?
No, I didn't. I came here and I got that job working at SARC, and that was a very just pivotal time for me in my career. And I decided at that point that I wanted to do a graduate program, but I decided not to go a clinical route, and instead, I really enjoyed the program development and the sort of the nonprofit management field. So I decided to go that direction. So I've done a few things. I've got my an MBA in healthcare management. I have my behavior analysis certificate from Southern Illinois University Carbondale with Dr. Dixon. And then I ended up doing a PhD as well with a more general theme of human services. But I did my dissertation, which is like half the PhD experience or more, on the experience of families receiving ABA treatment. So kind of a blend of many things. And, I'm not the expert on ABA within the organization at all, but got some extremely talented people that I work with that are. And so my job is to support them and support the growth of the organization and the work we do for families, and keep expanding the whole continuum of care, because ABA is just one of the things that we do, but obviously an extremely important one.
Yeah, I think I saw somewhere that you guys are also looking for other related service providers as well, and so it sounds like they're the business of, like, as you said, to your point of providing kind of what you might consider kind of full spectrum care. Or certainly no pun intended with that that term, but
that's right.
So how many how many people do you have working in the organization? How many areas do you serve within? And just give us a size of, give us a sense of the scope of the agency.
Sure. So currently we serve probably about 1,000 families a year through our various different programs and services. The ABA program is about 100 clients at a time. Currently, we're about to open a large new center, so that will probably go up to maybe 150 or so. But we have a number of other programs in a similar similar number of providers on staff. A lot of what we do is in-home support care, and so that's a large majority of it. But we also, in our clinical programs, we have speech therapy, we have occupational therapy, we have a psychologist on staff, and yes, we are recruiting for another one to do diagnostic evaluations for all ages, and not just autism, but broad, sort of comprehensive evaluations. We started a counseling program a couple years ago, and that's been a really important addition because we're very, very motivated by the goal of truly developing family-centered and sort of holistic family care. And we know, as everybody knows, autism does not only affect the individual on the spectrum, right? And so we have invested a lot to build out programs that support the other family members, siblings, parents, grandparents, whatever it is. We have a few sibling programs as well that we do. We have a number of just family support programs. We have a family support team. And I think this is actually one of the coolest things we do, even though it's small within the size of the organization. But it's a team of mostly parents, not all parents, mostly parents. And their job is to basically help other members of the community, mostly parents, with anything for free. And it's a free service for all members of the autism community. People, call or they book appointments online, and we help them with things like navigating all the systems of care, whether it's their insurance or government systems or school IEPs, certainly with accessing services, obviously our services, but also other services that either we don't offer or maybe we don't have any openings, and just sharing resources. And the basic idea is that, I've seen this with certainly my own family and many others, as I think all of us have. Parents get really stuck and really lost, and it's hard for them to find a trusted source that they can go to with any question and just be like, where do I start? And our team doesn't have all the answers, but it means that there's always someone they can call who will say, I'm going to look into that and get back to you, and just be someone who's knowledgeable, connected, experienced, and will always try to help them. I think this is extremely important. And I would hope that every community in the world has a resource like this for the autism community, because there are just those things where it's like, I don't know who to ask. And everybody I talk to will only tell me sort of, what's sort of like, well, these are the services we offer, but that's kind of all we can talk about, and it's like, okay, that's sort of helpful, but also always going to be a little bit biased. But then there are those things that come up where it's just like, well, who do I ask about this? And you can ask other parents, but then it can be a little bit all over the place. So that family support team is really huge for us. And it's also a care coordination mechanism. So we want any family who's getting multiple services through us to have the experience that those services are working together, and they're not getting different recommendations from different providers, which, as you know, is a common problem.
Wow, that's huge.
And so they have this, sort of like internal advocates, so to speak, who can talk to all the program leaders and help make sure we're connecting the dots, and we're talking to schools and getting them involved, and doctors, psychiatrists, case managers, whoever it is. So I think that particular program, even though, like I said, it's very small in the scope of what we do, it's kind of the glue that makes it all hold together and be, I think, just more effective and really makes it what we consider a family-centered care model.
Hey everyone, I just want to put a quick word in here for our friends at Behavior University. They've got a couple of cool webinars coming up. So if you go to behavioruniversity.com and just click on the webinars, there is a couple coming up that have caught my eye too, in particular, using computer-based instruction to train staff on complex behavior intervention procedures. And that's being taught by Dr. Johanna Staubitz. She was recently on ABA Inside Track. Great episode. I recommend checking that one out. And another one, August 29th, My Supervisor Doesn't Know Me. Woo! That's a provocative title, and that's by Dr. Antonio Harrison, previous guest on the podcast here, and a really good guy. So those are a couple coming up that I think look pretty interesting. You should definitely check them out if it sounds good to you. And if it's not what you're looking for, they've got other on-demand CEUs. They've got 8-hour supervision trainings, RBT trainings, and lots more. So you're going to want to go to behavioruniversity.com/observations to get the listener-specific coupon code to save on your CEU events. All right, let's get back to this interview with Aaron. I want to ask another question about that because it just occurred to me. Did you guys see a version of that model in other healthcare settings and want to kind of copy that, or was it something that was kind of organically derived? Because it reminds me very much of I've both within my family and outside of it, I've known tons and tons of people who've unfortunately had some form of cancer. And, and I've seen situations where and again, this is not a perfect analogy. I'm not saying autism can't, okay, I just want to say all those things, but, okay. But the care coordination piece is really what I'm keying in here on, one friend in particular, who had a pretty significant case of, they had a case manager essentially from the local kind of mega medical center here in New Hampshire and Vermont, the Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center. And this person was like their guru, their guide. They did all those things that you just described that you guys are providing to families. And so I'm wondering if that was inspired by care coordination in other medical settings like that.
Yeah, great question. Couple parts to that answer. So, I would say theoretically, this is what case managers are supposed to do. And we have, case managers through our various state systems, behavioral health systems, but it's just not realistic that they can really do it to this degree. And plus, there's all these complications with the process of getting your case manager and how many cases are they assigned to and what can they help you with? And there's all this paperwork. And so ours is really more sort of like an additional piece on top of that for families, if they even have a case manager, to just have more of like a go-to person that there's no strings attached with kind of thing, I haven't seen many great examples of this, but I would absolutely agree that it makes sense in all areas of healthcare. Had an experience recently with a family member being in the hospital in the emergency room, and then staying for a week or so, and my goodness, the lack of coordination among providers and technicians. I mean, it got to the point where it was like, why should we even listen to what the next person says? Because the person after that is going to say something different. Like, there's no point in getting attached to any of this information. They're clearly not talking to each other, and they just each have their own specialties. And I thought, boy, that kind of sounds familiar, So I think that's an area where we want to do better. But there was one inspiration that I had that I think really took what we sort of had as an informal family support program and made it into something that is now formalized. I visited the National Autistic Society in London a few years back. I had a fellowship grant through a local foundation to basically go out and learn about what other models are out there kind of thing. And so I was fortunate to visit, New England Center for Children and the May Institute and some really cool places. But I was able to do one out of the country trip. And I wanted to do that for a few reasons. One, NAS is not really talked about much here in my experience, but it's the oldest and largest autism charity in the world, or at least it was at the time. And so I think there's something there. And their history is quite interesting as well. Which I won't get into now, but you can certainly look up on their website. But I also wanted to see how is autism and autism treatment viewed differently in a different part of the world. Europe is not as different as other parts of the world, but I knew that from colleagues who had studied this with other conditions like Alzheimer's, for example. There was a striking difference between, the medical model, which we are very familiar with here in America, and sort of more of the social and acceptance model. One is like, how can we fix you to fit in with us? And the other is, how can we change ourselves so that we can better include you, and fit in with your lifestyle. So I just wanted to see what that was like. And it was it was really interesting. I visited some of their group homes. I saw, you know, adults with autism that were elderly, which I just hadn't really seen in real life, and it was quite striking. And just talking to the staff and the way that they perceive a behavior and what's causing it, and is it internal versus external, and these types of things. So I won't go into too much detail there, but I will say that one of the most moving experiences for me was I went to their diagnostic clinic, and it wasn't the most efficient operation. I mean, they would see like one kid a week or something like that, but it was extremely thorough. And I had a sit down with the evaluator and just sort of interviewed her. And what really stood out to me was that, you know, she said, we have families come in here for a full day. And the first half of the day, we are evaluating, we're testing, we're observing, right? The second half of the day, let me go back. At midday, we're giving the diagnosis. I'm sure they're doing some pre-work before this, but the second half of the day, now the diagnosis has been given. We are going to spend the rest of the day helping them navigate what's next. And I said, you know, that is so different from what we see. I mean, in every diagnosis I've ever seen, it's this long process to complete the evaluation, and then it ends with a PDF. And it's like, see the last page for some bullet points. And that's it. You know, maybe a brief sit down. And that's the day that parents always describe as, you know, the day when the bomb dropped, so to speak. And, you know, that was just such a, what are we doing moment for me. It's like, we're putting parents in like the worst moment of their lives. And then like, good luck. Hope, you know, here's a couple phone numbers. Hope half of them are still in service, you know, and this is so common in diagnostic evals. So we didn't have a program yet at that point, but we were in the process of planning one out, and we came up with this concept that we called support from the start. And basically it was, you know, we are not going to do evals that complete an eval and send you on your way. Basically, the first step will be the evaluation. And then the second step will be, now here's family support. In fact, they'll actually work with you before you get to the eval. But then afterwards, you'll immediately be with someone that helps you figure out what's next and how to get services and get connected and get approved, and also the emotional support. And if you're really struggling, we have this counseling program as well. And so I think that's kind of the approach we take to family-centered care, where we're just thinking about like, what are all the pieces involved in the family's journey? And, you know, there are many holes to fill, many gaps, but where are the biggest ones, and how can we have an impact? So I think from there, it really formalized that family support program, and we've kind of taken that concept and applied it to all of our programs.
Hey everyone, balancing work and life can be difficult, and that's why the University of Cincinnati Online has designed a Master's of Education in Behavior Analysis program that is 100% online and asynchronous, meaning you log on when it works for you. Their student success coordinators will work with you from start all the way until graduation to ensure you are receiving the support you need. Graduate in as few as 5 semesters from a top 10 program in total number of graduates, and prepare for the BCBA exam. The program is also FAFSA eligible, and the University of Cincinnati also offers a business partnership program to offer tuition discounts to eligible employees. If you want to learn more, go to online.uc.edu and click the request info button. I think this is an appropriate segue, because as you were describing that, and it just seems like a different way of doing business. And I'm sure when you're describing the situation where someone, you know, the diagnostic encounter, as you say, ends with a PDF and some list of recommendations, I'm sure there are going to be many, many, many listeners nodding their head in agreement that they've seen just that thing. So based on that, do you think being a nonprofit gives you more flexibility to provide that aftercare? And if so, what allows you to do that?
I personally do. There's been some discussion certainly in the ABA community of, does it matter if you're a nonprofit, and is it just a tax status? And I personally I don't buy that line of thinking. I think certainly there are good and bad examples of organizations at every level. Every type. Leadership is critical. So it's not that one is inherently better than the other. But, Matt, you're a behaviorist, so this will be easy for you to understand. We all operate in an environment of contingencies, right? And it shapes our behavior. Like, if you don't believe that, then you're not a behaviorist. So, think about who is running any organization or business or provider company, and what are the primary contingencies. As a nonprofit, first of all, we don't have any investors. So nobody's calling me every week and like demanding, results or metrics, or, did you hit these growth variables, and, how many new centers did you open? How many, whatever. Those are very sort of like profit growth, investor driven type of approaches. And, again, not all bad. It can be done well, but we don't have that. Also, I think this is super important, and I think it's a reason why I wouldn't have been good at this if it wasn't a nonprofit. It's not my money. I don't own the company. I am not the owner. I can get fired, right? I'm an employee here. I'm a steward. I'm an ambassador of the organization, and my job is to take good care of the funds we have to pursue a mission. And that is something I'm very comfortable with, and I feel like I'm good at. I don't think I would be good at it if it was like, this is my business, because I'm pretty stingy in real life when it comes to my own my own money, and I get very worried about stuff like that. But I think I can think more clearly and objectively when I'm in a role. And also, I don't operate by myself. We nonprofits have a board of directors, and those board members are all volunteers. So they have no incentive for the organization to, drive growth and make money, other than they want it to do well. They want to see the mission achieved. I mean, board members are donors, so they're essentially paying to be on the board only because they care, only because many of them have kids with autism, or they know someone, or whatever it is, and they want to see good work being done and families getting the help they need. And so those are kind of the contingencies that I operate in. I have to be able to demonstrate that, yes, we are financially sustainable and we are pursuing goals, but families are satisfied with the work that we're doing. Needs are being met. Staff appreciate the opportunity to work here in the culture, and that we're fostering something positive for the community. And that leads to things like, hey, let's create a family support program, because nobody does this and families really need it. And it's not going to be a question of like, is there a way to make money from this? It's going to be, what do we need to do to be able to afford this? And that's it. And so that's kind of how we look at all of our programs. And so it's a combination of grants for things that don't have a funding source, like that one, or just saying, well, if we do this other service and that does generate some net income, what can we do with that? Because unlike any for-profit business, nobody gets to keep it. That's the big difference. That's really the main thing. Being a nonprofit, you're mission driven, you got the volunteer board, and nobody gets to keep your money. And people say like, oh, you're nonprofit, does that mean you can't make a profit? No, it doesn't mean you can't make a profit. It means nobody gets to cash out. You got to take that profit and put it back into the mission. And you can have a savings. You don't have to spend it all every year, because then you'd just be at risk all the time. So that's important too. You want to be sustainable, but that's how we are able to invest in things like I mentioned, sibling programs and parent support groups, and things that are definitely a loss leader, so to speak, if you're looking at a balance sheet, but are worth it because they're part of the overall package, and the package is achieve the mission. For us, that's to help as many families as possible with individualized supports.
Man, there's a bunch of follow-up questions to that. I'm trying to figure out which one to tackle first, but it's a lot of really interesting points here. Let me start with this. You mentioned fostering a good workplace culture. So tell me a little bit about the culture at AZA, and what about the, I guess, legal structure of the entity allows you to kind of create that culture?
Yeah, great question. Well, we're very proud of the culture. It's something we've worked really hard at. At 17 years, you learn a lot along the way. I was very much a rookie at the beginning of this whole journey, but it's been amazing. I think that Yeah, so some words that I would use to describe our culture is friendly, helpful, supportive, welcoming, absolutely working hard. And then I think just everybody really cares. They really care about what we do and the impact of the work we do, and they care about each other's success. I don't feel like there's any sort of internal competition here, because we don't have structures and contingencies in place where people need to compete with each other. It's kind of everybody has the opportunity to grow and advance and succeed. So I think that, and then in terms of our reputation, I think that the area we've most been sort of known for over the years is just that we really prioritize families and the needs of families, and tailoring our programs, our policies, our approaches, our communications, everything to be compassionate and, speak to those needs directly. So, absolutely best practice, high quality, all the buzzwords, of course, but it's like everybody says those things. Those should be a given. Nobody wants to be like, we're going to be the largest mediocre quality ABA provider, obviously
Arizona's
we're
okayest ABA. Yes,
I like that one. Okay, that's good. That's a meme right there.
Yeah.
When I see these places being like, we're number one, it's like, number one at what? Like, did somebody measure something that I missed? Anyway, but no, for us, it's like, it's all about values, and we have, I really like our values too. We have 4 of them: grow with purpose. I think that applies to the organization, to the staff, to the families. Be of service, right? That's a huge one, because that's, as a nonprofit, that's literally the reason you exist, is to be of service to the community. Stay informed. That's why I went to the Autism Investor Summit. You gotta, know what's going on. But I think we try to keep our staff informed of, things that are going on and all that kind of stuff. And bring people together. That's the 4th one. And that to me really represents our goal of like, it's not about competing. It's about being part of a community and uplifting, and with staff as well. So I think that, we've done some interesting things for staff that I don't know that you couldn't do them in a for-profit, but I haven't seen it yet. So one of the things we do is guaranteed pay raises. We realized some years back, and frankly, this was from my side studies on OBM and a class I teach at Arizona State University, that the traditional model of managers deciding how much their employees should make based on performance reviews was a really bad model, because number one, you put managers in a position that they're not qualified for. And I have yet to meet a manager that enjoys doing this. They don't want to be responsible for divvying up a pot of money with their staff or something like that, because how are they supposed to know? The whole world knows that performance reviews they're certainly not comprehensive, and they're very arguably objective, if, at best. And so it leaves everybody dissatisfied. And then there's no sense of expectations for the employees. Like, what should I expect this year? What should I expect next year? That kind of thing. And that leads to things like, lack of equity in pay and, gender and other areas and things like that. Because you're just leaving it up to people's whims and how they feel in the moment. But for me, the biggest problem was, and I think this speaks to the culture, we really embraced the idea of a supervisor being a coach and being a mentor, and that their primary job is to develop their team and help them grow and help them do the best work they can do. That's really hard when they're also the gatekeeper of their financial future. That's just an inherent conflict. And how can you take feedback from someone, critical feedback, when it comes with this contingency of like, oh, great, now I'm probably not going to get a raise. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so we just made this decision that, you know what, we're taking the supervisors, the managers, 100% out of it. They don't even need to know what their employees make, and they're not going to have any say in any pay decisions, because their job is to take care of their team. And we want every employee to be open to critical feedback and to want to get better and not feel like it comes with this, oh no, strings attached. And so the only way we could come up with to do that was to just say, pay is all predetermined, And so for every position, whether it's behavior technician or BCBA or office administrator or whatever it is, all the way up to senior management, there is a chart, and it says every 6 months, this is the progression. You have a starting point. We have some qualifications, objective qualifications to figure out where you start. And now you've got the next, 3 years or so where you can be confident in what your pay is going to be, and you can make decisions about your life with that information. And it doesn't matter if your supervisor changes or your boss changes or whatever. And hey, if you get promoted, great news, you get a new pay progression. So it's not like you're locked into it forever, but you don't have to worry that it's going to go down, or you don't know when your next raise is coming. And it was really important to me that we do it every 6 months because, it's not perfect, but it's better than what you see normally. And what do we know about motivating positive behavior? It has to be frequent reinforcement. So if it's sort of like once every 2 years you get a raise, if we think money has anything to do with performance, then we got to do better than that. But we didn't want that to be the main motivator. And so that really opened things up to these performance reviews can be a lot more informal. Also, everybody should have at minimum a monthly meeting where they're getting feedback, giving feedback, working on their personal development. And so I think those are some things where structurally we were able to put some things in place that allowed sort of a positive culture to evolve where everybody feels like they have opportunity.
Wow, that's interesting. I'm sure the OBM oriented listeners probably are having a variety of thoughts about that model.
And I'm telling you, the idea came from OBM because in the performance management book, Aubrey Daniels, John Bailey, it's like, if you're counting on money to be the motivator for your staff to succeed, you're doing it wrong. You can't possibly do it frequently enough, and you can't give them enough to make a difference. So you've got to have daily forms of other reinforcement. And it just seemed to me that this whole system of the raise and the performance review and all the pressure and everything, it just got in the way of all of that. So we just kind of took that out and standardized it all. And then people apply for a job, they know exactly what they're applying for. And I can tell you, we have had so many fewer issues ever since we did that and I still hear about it today. I heard about it on an HR training that I saw the other day where the consultant was talking about experiences where the supervisor offers a pay raise and they're really excited because they think the employee is going to be blown away by how much they're offering them. And then the employee leaves in tears because it was a complete mismatch of their expectation. They thought it was going to be something totally different. And he's like, if anybody has any solutions to this, I'd love to hear it because I haven't seen one. Thinking the solution is actually not that complicated. Let them know in advance, so that there's no surprises.
That's interesting. I as you know, I consult the public schools. My wife's a public school teacher. All our friends are school teachers, and it's a similar model where there's the kind of the step raises over time. The frequency of is a little different. It's a little longer, obviously, based off. Mm-hmm. It's how many years of service, essentially, years experience. And I suppose that someone doesn't enter your organization and they're going to. I would imagine another area where people could grow is that you perhaps could climb up the organizational chart, I suppose. Whereas in teaching, unless someone wants to go into administration or something like that, they're going to be a second grade teacher, and they're going to be a second grade teacher 10 years later, 20 years later, and 30 years later, possibly. So there are some, it's not a perfect analogy here, but one of the things I sometimes see is that in those settings that the removal of any type of contingency as it relates to income sometimes drives some stagnation in performance. So I'm wondering if that was a concern when you created this model, because that's the first thing that jumped into my mind. If you've got people who are very, very high achievers, and you've got people who aren't, and how do you differentially reinforce those staff members' repertoires such that you get more of the former and less of the latter?
Yeah, it's funny because when I tell people about this system, their first reaction is usually, well, how do you motivate performance? And I say, well, how do you? Because if you're doing it through annual performance reviews, you're definitely doing it wrong. Like that's not how you build, a high performing team and a winning culture. The thing that I think struck me most, and again, I go back to just the OBM literature and Aubrey Daniels' work, is that when you give someone a raise, they're excited about it for maybe a couple weeks, if you're lucky, and then it becomes normal. And it's not like they're like, oh my God, I'm buying a mansion now. I mean, you don't notice that big of a difference in the paycheck because it's like, you can't give people like 100% raise overnight. You know what I mean? And so that shouldn't be your strategy to motivate your staff. There are many, many things that we are all motivated by on a daily basis. The work we do, the people we work with, the projects we engage in, just the various stimulation we have through all the different things we're doing. I'm motivated doing this podcast with you right now. I'm not getting paid extra to do it, but like, this makes me love my job. This is really cool. Sure. Giving people opportunities, and just connections, and I think by attracting the right people and keeping the right people, that naturally builds culture because we have so many cool people that work here and just enjoy like getting to know each other. We have a very lively, we use Teams a lot for communication, so it's like Slack if you don't know Teams, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we've got it very organized into, different departments and that kind of stuff. But we also have what we call our social channel, which is just like fun stuff and anybody can post anything. And man, it is so fun to see like all the crazy things that people do in there. Whether it's like, sharing pictures of their animals. We do like, just fun pictures of like, what were you up to over the summer? We do like random fun questions where people just share all kinds of stuff. And it's just different ways that was especially important during the pandemic, of course, to be connected. It's also really important that we have in-person stuff. So we do every month, we have an all staff meeting or professional development. Our staff meetings are not what I would call business meetings. They're not there to be like, okay, guys, we're going to report the numbers. It's there for, it's team building is what it is. It's like a pep rally. So we do some fun stuff. We share some updates. We share stories. We often have staff member come and just share success stories they've had with kids, with families. Sometimes they're funny. Sometimes they're very emotional. But I think it's just constantly tying us back to like this mission and like, we care about the work we're doing. And we are so proud of like all the people we work with and how they are carrying it forward. And like, I want to be a part of this and I want to contribute and plus, giving everybody opportunities to pursue projects and advance, like those to me are what I would want people to be motivated by. And I think the pay thing was sort of to say, you don't have to worry about this part, this you can count on. And, if you keep advancing in the organization, then there's obviously more pay available that way too. But we don't want, do I want to work here or not to be based on like, well, what's my raise going to be after my next review and who's my supervisor and does he really understand or she really understand the value I'm bringing? And I think that's more common than motivation.
So relative to that, I wanted to ask you about retention, I suppose, because I worked for a nonprofit organization years ago. And one of the things that struck me about it was how many people that were self-described lifers, if you will, to the organization and worked there for, 15, 25 years, like long time. Do you feel that model or some of those characteristics that you just described lends itself to a more stable workforce? Or do you see some staff, have you had staff get kind of peeled off by some of these agencies dangling, really large signing bonuses and things like that? Can you talk a little bit about how what you guys do fits into the greater milieu of the marketplace for behavioral professionals, if you will? Again, really with respect to kind of staff retainment and retention.
Yeah, critical, especially right now. It's as we're growing and hiring is and retaining is very challenging. We have done very well overall. Our retention rates are really high, and that's something we're proud of. I don't think it's because we're a nonprofit. I think many of the things I've described help. But if you're working for a struggling, poorly run nonprofit, that's not going to be, a recipe for retention, or they don't have any funding or something. That can be really draining. So we've worked really hard to push work-life balance, or that type of a mentality. With our clinical staff, we always kind of had the 40 hours of work means you're working 40 hours, not 60 hours kind of thing. Burning people out, not having crazy high billable expectations, that kind of stuff, compared to other companies. And yeah, absolutely. We've got some great retention. We've got our senior management team. Most of them have been with us a very long time. We've never had anybody leave that team, which I'm very proud of in 17 years. We've got lots of great examples of people moving up. For example, our director of ABA services, Nanette Pike, she started as a rehabilitation care provider, which is, that basic level in-home care. And she's been with us for over a decade, and just, moved her way up, and just constantly demonstrated that she was committed and talented and knowledgeable, and always learning, and just great with other people. So we have, I think, quite a few examples like that. And yeah, I think that, our organization, of course, is not for everybody. We've like every organization, we have an identity, we have a culture. I think we have a strong one, and those who are attracted to it tend to do great. And those who maybe it's not for them, that's fine. They can move on. We don't resist that, and I don't expect everybody to stay here forever either, right? So for some people, it is a phase, and then they move on, and that's totally fine. I would say that, it was quite scary a few years ago when, 150 ABA companies decided to move to Arizona all at once, and they all had millions of dollars of marketing and LinkedIn recruiters to try to steal everybody's staff to, fill up their clinics. And we had a few that went, but overall, not that many really. And we actually had a few that left and came back when they realized what was on the other side. I think we really try to prioritize capable leadership. We don't put highly inexperienced people in positions of great power or responsibility. I just think that's unfair to everybody, including the person who takes that job. And try to coach people and mentor them and get them to the point where they can do it. And then humble leadership. We really don't have any attitudes of like, if you're higher on the org chart, you're always right, or something like that, or shooting down people's ideas. And frankly, if we see that, we call it out right away and we stamp it out, because I think if you care about your culture, you have to be protective of it. And you have to immediately put an end to anything that is going to negatively affect it. And then the other thing that we did a few years ago was a conscious decision to really invest in middle management, because we were at a point where we had a number of people sort of at the top, all the other staff, and then everybody just had way too many direct reports. And it was clear that they couldn't be good leaders if they had that many people they're responsible for, but also it didn't provide enough growth opportunities, which is part of the motivation for everybody else. And so we went from 10 supervisors to about 40 in a couple of years. And so that, I think, has made a big difference, not only for those growth paths, but hopefully for everybody throughout the organization to feel like my supervisor cares about me, has time for me, helps me grow, helps me do my best work. I think that ultimately leads to better services for families. And then, of course, you've got to do those frequent surveys and feedback meetings and things like that to make sure that people feel that way and be open to the suggestions to keep improving.
All right. That's really informative. I feel like I have a much better sense of your agency, your mission, and what you guys do that's different than perhaps other providers that are out there. Unless there's something else that you want to mention about that, I do want to move on to these red flags, if you will, that you've been posting about, and to be fair, green flags of stuff that's going right too. Feel free to mention those. But again, it did catch my eye. You always have really interesting things to say on LinkedIn, and I always look forward to seeing when you post something. It's definitely worth the pause to read it. And so tell me about why you started writing about these ABA red. We'll get into what some of these red flags are in a certain place, but what were you seeing that kind of to motivated you to start, for lack of a better term, calling some of these practices out, if you will? And yeah, let's start with there.
Yeah. Well, let me say first that, one of the elements for me of being in a nonprofit leadership position is you get a lot of practice speaking to the community about, what's the right thing to do and how do we make life better for people and, things like that. So I think that's a mindset that I adopt, all the time. And I'm used to talking or writing about that kind of stuff, but I really wasn't a big social media user. And I liked LinkedIn and I had a little bit of involvement, but I wasn't really like doing anything steady until some articles and news started dropping about mass layoffs and providers just all of a sudden stopping services and pulling out of state. And, just basically the exact kind of thing that I was worried about 2 years earlier, but I didn't know for sure if I was right or wrong. So I didn't want to speak too loudly on it. But when I saw and heard about sort of the massive wave of certainly private equity and just the corporatization of ABA services and autism services, I was very nervous. Like, this feels like there are going to be a lot of problems that pop up because as much as everybody's talking about like, oh yeah, high quality clinical outcomes, all this stuff and building capacity, great. But I'm also seeing a lot of dollar signs on the other end of that motivation. And, again, contingencies. What is private equity? It's a very straightforward model. You go in, you grow, and then you get out, and that's it. And you make sure that you hit certain returns. So whatever attention is paid to quality and long-term sustainability is probably only a means to that end, which, is just very different from the way we operate, where we think about, okay, we're doing something that's going to be good for the long term, not just for this company or this organization, but for the community, right? For the field. And I got pretty worried that we were going to see some things that ran counter to that. So frankly, I started my sort of LinkedIn rants with just joining a conversation that had already started and sharing my thoughts and just, saying, wow, I think the one of the things that really stood out to me was there was an article about, I think it started with the mass layoffs that came, and then seeing some quotes from leaders saying like, well, that we just had no other choice because of, market conditions and, business speak, right? And I thought, you've raised how many millions of dollars from investors? And I'm looking at one in particular here where the owner of the private equity firm is a billionaire. And I'm thinking, you had no other choice. You had to just do this all within, 24 hours or 30 days. Like, come on, you always have another choice. But you don't care, or you're operating in a contingency where you don't have the freedom to do what I would consider to be the right thing. It was interesting. We saw a lot of those companies kind of backtrack some things, but then it's just damage control, right? But that tells me, well, clearly you could have done it that way all along. The most extreme example, which I won't name any names, but I'm sure many people saw it in the news, was a company that just shut down services in entire states and gave families as little as 15 minutes notice. I mean, can you imagine a parent being like, okay, my provider will be here in 15 minutes. And they probably got, I don't know, a text message or something saying, never mind, we no longer provide services in your state.
Yeah, crazy.
You know how long it takes to get going with a provider, to get an evaluation, to get a program, and for your child to form relationships with the therapists. This isn't something it's like, oh, we're selling coffee today, never mind, go to the other coffee shop tomorrow.
Yeah, it's nothing short of earth-shattering for a family.
It's not the same thing, and you can't treat it that way. And then you look at some of the people that were suddenly, major leaders of these companies and had no background in this field. So not surprising they're treating it like a commodity. And I think that's just not the way to do it. But, that one particular example, I think a couple of things that stood out to me. First of all, I had people on LinkedIn reaching out to me saying, I worked there and I'm so upset about this. And then all of a sudden now they're trying to hire me back and pay me like triple the rate because they're obviously like, kicking their feet, realizing like, not only is this terrible for PR, but like we might get sued by Medicaid because you're not allowed to do that.
You can't do that.
Should have known that actually, but being the highest quality provider, I guess you didn't look into that one. But there was a quote in one of those articles with the won't share any names, but it was whoever was in the senior management team and was sort of the clinical, integrity officer or whatever the title is. And this was someone who had a strong history in the field to the point of like working for the BACB. So like clearly knows something about what we do. And the reporter said like, do you think like giving 15 minutes notice to families is the appropriate way to do this? And I felt so bad for this guy because you could just see it in the response. It was like, well, I'm not the only one who gets to decide, right? I mean, you understand that, right? And clearly they're not listening to him. They don't care. And I just, that's the kind of stuff that to me is like, this is huge red flag stuff. The power has been completely shifted to people who don't know or don't care about right and wrong in this field. So that I think was the impetus for me to start speaking out. And then the wave of reactions I got that I did not expect, tons of responses to my posts, tons of just people messaging me that I didn't know, sharing their stories, sharing their concerns. And I mean, I just couldn't believe some of the things I was hearing because I kind of knew some shady stuff was going on, but you don't really know it until you start hearing the meat and bones of it. And all these people who are afraid to speak up are telling me what's going on behind closed doors at the clinics where, in some of these places, they're not letting parents in, so nobody can watch what's going on. They're making excuses about why they don't have anything. They don't have any cameras, which doesn't make any sense to me. I'm just going to say that. I think that's a huge red flag. And then I'm hearing things like they told us that if our client got COVID, we were not allowed to tell any of the other parents because we didn't want them to cancel their sessions. It's just like, are you kidding me? You're literally putting, at that time, we thought people's lives at risk so you can keep billing your hours.
Wow.
And these are companies that are backed by, hundreds of millions of dollars or whatever. It's like, they can't take a hit for a little while to like do the right thing.
Yeah.
Not surprisingly, these are the types of companies that end up in the news for, violations. But, that to me is like, if nobody's going to say anything, then it's just being reinforced. And that's the whole thing. Like back to behavioral contingencies. If nothing stops the behavior and there's so much reinforcement for it, why would we expect it to change? So I can't do it by myself, but I started with LinkedIn posts. People really seem to be responding to them. And I thought, the best thing I can hope for is that we're creating awareness for all the people that work there. Because if they won't stand for it, the companies will have to change.
Yeah, I have seen some of those things that you just described on a smaller scale. Because I think we have this thing, and I think you alluded to this earlier in our conversation, where there are private equity-backed companies that are doing really good work. There are nonprofits that are struggling. Another, I guess, sector perhaps, or what we might consider, small to medium-sized business or the mom and pops, and some of those places are doing fantastic work, and some of those places, that are owned and operated by BCBAs, are experiencing the same issues that you just described with some. I guess that the problem is that if you're a large multi-state organization, these problems manifest themselves at a catastrophic scale. Whereas the mom and pop agency that is poorly performing or making some of the, taking some of those shortcuts or whatever, or, however you want to describe it, is has a smaller footprint. So I think it's important to acknowledge that, certainly.
Absolutely true. And I think that, it would still be worth speaking up about these things if they were all happening among small providers, right? Setting kind of standards for the field. My biggest concern was that this is a new element. We're talking about a lot of money, a lot of resources, and a lot of ability to sort of drown out the bad press, so to speak, right? Very aggressive marketing, very aggressive recruiting. You see it all over social media all the time. You can just a lot going into these, like, wow, look at how amazing we are. Oh, you heard that one bad thing about us? Look at these 10 great things about us that we paid for. It just, I really worried about this stuff becoming normalized. And I was speaking with a colleague recently who told me that, I don't know if this number is accurate, but 65%, I think it was, of BCBAs have been in the field for like less than 3 years, right? I mean,
oh, it's crazy. Yeah, I don't know. It's something like that. I don't remember. I don't know what the exact figure is, but it's mind blowing.
So there you go. So more than half the field walking into it and being like, oh, I guess this is how it is, right? Like, that's my concern. We who have been in the field a little bit longer, we need to be like, no, that's not how it's supposed to be. You're in like a very recent trend where there's been a lot of money and a lot of just new ways of thinking about how to grow these organizations and these services, that has some great elements. There's absolutely been some improvements and standardizations and things like that. But we got to be real aware of where things are going south, because that's, to me, where the whole thing becomes unsustainable. And another big issue, I'm sure you've seen me talk about this one, this is my biggest one, is families being coerced into more ABA than they want or need. So, I mean, I cannot find a single rationale for any model that says every kid should have 40 hours a week of ABA. I studied with Lovas. Like, this is what was ingrained into my head. It's 40 hours or nothing. But that's not true. And I even know now, which they didn't tell us at the time, even in that Lovas study, 40 hours was only an average. Right? Some kids were getting 20. Some kids were getting 60. They were kind of working with what they could. Plus, it was the 80s. Like, let's not act like nothing has changed in 40 years.
Sure.
You know what I mean? This is not the same world our kids are living in. Parents are so much more informed. There's so many more resources. There's so many more other things that are beneficial. And this is just not the right model. And guess what? Like, when you overdo it for any treatment, whether it's ABA or medication or chemotherapy, it has negative effects on the child and on the family. Everything has an opportunity cost. If you're doing ABA therapy hours, you're not doing something else. That doesn't mean that nobody should get that. Absolutely. But we need to make sure that the kids who need that and the families who want it are able to do it. And it's done with integrity and it's beneficial. But it's not forced upon those who don't. And having a family support team at AZA United, one of the real benefits is parents call us and they tell us everything. And so I hear all kinds of stories of what's going on in the field, because parents are calling us and say, what do I do? My provider is telling me this. And a lot of times it's saying that you need to commit to 40 hours or you get nothing. Or insurance won't approve this if you don't do 40 hours. Are you kidding me? What insurance company would say that? Or if you cancel, more than twice and whatever, then, I mean, it's just like, we have to have like cancellation policies and things like that. And we want to, do authorization, utilization, trends. We want to be utilizing the authorizations we have, but they should be appropriate to the child. And what we see, because again, parents send us stuff, cookie cutter treatment plans, what I would call basically fake diagnostic evals. I mean, I'm seeing these like 1-page, really poorly written templates where parents get a free evaluation done by a BCBA, who obviously can't diagnose autism. They give them a piece of paper and say, take this to your pediatrician, have them sign it. We'll send it to your insurance company and we'll get you approved for 40 hours a week. And that's the whole model. It's not an evaluation that can do anything anywhere else, but they don't tell parents that, of course. And just very like, my stepmom is a psychologist, so she's been diagnosing for years. And so she sees some of these too, because she works in a school and parents bring them to her. And she's like, what is this? Like, this is the most terrible report I've ever written. It doesn't even like mention the kid's name. It says like baby boy everywhere. And then like the conclusions don't even make sense. It says like, has excellent eye contact, engages socially, diagnosis autism. Just like, what? Like, it doesn't even, it's just like, it's like a bot is doing these eval reports.
It's like
so,
Chat GPT.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, And I feel,
ChatGPT would probably do a better job.
yeah, well, that's probably what's next. There was a lot about AI at this summit. Anyway, I feel bad for BCBAs that are being put in positions to do things that they may or may not feel are an ethical issue, and that probably depends on their level of experience and knowledge of the broader field. But I worry is going to come back to bite them because they're being manipulated in situations like that. We've had parents say that my BCBA told me that anything less than full-time ABA is unethical. That is such a manipulation of research, and anybody who has studied as much as you have and cares about this field knows that's not where it was supposed to end up. We didn't do decades of research so that some fancy business guys could come in and just take the parts they like and, give it to a marketing team and force everybody to say these canned lines so that they can maximize their dollars. And I'm sorry, that's a very crude interpretation of what's going on. Again, I know there's a lot of good stuff too, but those are the types of mentalities that worry me. Yes, there's all still the same issues there's always been with mom and pop shops and things like that, and nonprofits, and, poor quality care and inadequate training. And, all those issues still exist and still need attention for sure. I just want to make sure that this one doesn't sort of become dominant and just accepted as the way it is. And frankly, puts all those other littler providers out because we can't keep up. And I don't think that it sustains the field. I don't see why funders would continue to pay unless they absolutely have to for something that is being blatantly manipulated, and that's really a threat to everybody who's trying to do it with integrity. And that's a threat to all the future kids who are going to need ABA. We've made so much progress to make it accessible. Now we need to protect that access to care and expand it. And I just worry that it hasn't been very long since all these new sort of trends emerged. Although I do feel a little better that there's some right sizing happening. But when I started with all the LinkedIn stuff and my hashtag ABA red flag movement, that was my goal. It was not to just be a downer, but to not ignore that there were some real serious risks going on, and people needed to be aware, and they needed to have the courage, feel supported enough to be able to speak up, because I know a lot of people were afraid to.
Hey everyone, as a BCBA, meeting your continuing ed needs can be challenging at times. That's why I've made selected episodes of the Behavioral Observations podcast available for Type 2 continuing education credits. That's right. You can meet a portion of your professional development requirements on the go. Currently, we have CEs for topics including functional assessment, ethics, and supervision. Come learn from podcast favorites such as Greg Hanley, Pat Fryman, Mark Dixon, as well as many other amazing guests. For more information, head on over to behavioralobservations.com/get CEs. Well, again, I'll say that you really did spark some good conversation there. So let's I guess wrap this up for a little bit because I know you mentioned the Autism Investor Conference. You again wrote on LinkedIn how you're kind of pleasantly you were joking around with me through email correspondence saying you were going to go there as a spy. Right. Just I really thought it was funny, a funny analogy, but
wasn't entirely untrue. But yes.
and then came away pleasantly surprised from that experience. Hobnobbing with the very people that not the very people, but the environment in which perhaps some of those red flag stuff could possibly propagate from. So talk about what your I guess from my perspective surprisingly optimistic take from not just from that event, but also, in terms of, well, let's talk about some of the solutions, some of the green flags, if you will, about how do we kind of, where do we go from here relative to, you mentioned right sizing. I'd like to hear a little bit more of what you mean about what that actually means in practice. And so let's kind of move this in a positive direction
here.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, regarding the Autism Investor Summit, I did go to the first one, which was, like 5 years ago. And it was really good. And so I really want to commend Sarah Littback and all of their team for the event they put on. I think it's a unique event. It says, Investor Summit suggests it's only for investors, but that's not the case. And so one thing that I like about it is they are including stuff that kind of along the lines of what I'm saying, that like we want investors to know, like, hey, some of these things are not okay. So, don't do those. Now, whether or not they listen, I don't know. But I think there's some really great content that at the event that they share that are just about how to grow responsibly and successfully, and recruiting challenges and technology and integrated care, all these trends that affect everybody. And I thought that it was just well done. I learned a lot. Yeah, green flags. So I think that I feel a little bit more optimistic because, first of all, we have seen some pretty epic failures publicly. Failure might be the wrong word, but certainly some real negative press about some things, and like even you said, just the LinkedIn conversations. I do feel like the awareness has spread a lot in the last year, because even like our staff here initially, they had no idea what was going on because they only work here, And I did a presentation for our staff sharing a lot of the concerns I had and what we'd been hearing and messages I've been getting and things our family support team have been hearing and these articles, and they just didn't know. And they were just, they kind of had a sense. It's kind of like when private equity first showed up, like everybody like kind of knew, but they didn't really understand what it was. So I do feel like that awareness has helped to just put pressure on leaders of organizations to lead with integrity and to be more transparent and so on, and to recognize when something doesn't seem right. I'm sure there's still plenty of things going on that are problematic, but even the guests you had on recently from CAIO talking about their study of kids doing well regardless of how many treatment hours they had. Say what you want about the study, but I was impressed that two leaders within a private equity funded company were brave enough to talk about that. I think that like just having those dialogues is good, because I've seen so much defaulting to, well, no, research says every kid needs 40 hours a week. Don't want to go against the research. And I'm like, what research are you talking about? And they send me a whole bunch of article links to try to like, mic drop. And then I basically look at every one of those articles and I'm like, it doesn't say that. It says like ABA is better than non-ABA, or 25 hours a week is better than 10 hours a week or something like that. But no study, I've not seen one study that I would validate that says every kid needs 40 hours a week. So, those types of trends, I think, were really concerning. Anything that's taking away transparency for parents is also a huge red flag. So I do see some improvement there. And I see more efforts from multiple sources of authority to be supporting these things and putting out statements about, you cannot have a child with a therapist in an unobservable environment. That is a recipe for abuse. Everybody knows that in every other field. Frankly, our insurance company demands it, that there's never unobservable treatment. So, some of the stories I heard where parents were told they're not allowed to come in because it distracts the other kids, and we don't have any cameras because it's a HIPAA violation. Like, those are just not good answers, and guess what? They're not motivated by any form of clinical integrity. So I think that's the other thing is, we have to have models that empower the clinicians. Anything that is taking away that clinical autonomy to make the right treatment recommendations based on their expertise, like that is a slippery slope. And we've seen that where clinicians, I think hiring very inexperienced clinicians or brand new BCBAs to be clinical directors, what do you expect? They haven't had enough time to really know. They're green. They're going to be, they can easily be sort of manipulated. Not all of them, but the ones that know better, well, they'll get conveniently laid off. So, those are the things that I think I'm seeing improvement in terms of awareness and more people being willing to say that publicly and and just sort of put the pressure on these businesses and to inform the investors that that shouldn't be your model, And I think seeing a few very public downfalls is helpful because they have to see that there's some consequences. That was the problem before. But I also enjoyed at the summit seeing the amount of other innovations that are happening, many of which are investor funded. There was a really cool panel by the what's it called, the Autism Impact Fund, and it was like 6 panelists, all of them except one, I believe, were parents. So that immediately gave me a little bit of sense of credibility. They're all like, my kid has been through this, and it's a venture capitalist fund funding like innovative technology, and it was all kinds of interesting stuff. It was virtual reality. There was one that like wants to basically take video of the RBT working with a child and use artificial intelligence to take all the data for you, and way more data than you could ever take by yourself.
Well, I'm all for that.
Like and this is coming from a mom who has 4 kids with autism. So it's like she's got the integrity in terms of why she wants to do this. It was just cool to see things that are happening. There was some really interesting stuff with integrated care of organizations combining the medical and the medication components with behavioral and other therapies and making those all talk together and having better technology and to align it. So I like all of that. And I felt like there was a good sense of wanting to do this because it's going to advance the field and it's going to advance care. I'm sure there's still going to be some of the other issues, but I think that the last time I went to the Autism Investor Summit, there were a number of panels with investors, and they were all saying the right things about clinical quality and that kind of stuff, but it all rang pretty hollow, and it was questionable at the time if it's like, okay, that's the right thing to say, but is that, actions speak louder than words? And a few years later, we saw that a lot of that wasn't really the priority. But I didn't feel that this time. I feel like that has come along. And maybe that's just part of the evolution and the life cycle of, a rapid investment phase. I think that I try to be conscious of history in other fields. You hear doctors talk about how private equity ruined primary care. You hear behavioral health providers talk about how, so much just went downhill once these things happened. It's happened in hospitals. There was one story, and I know this is an extreme example, but I think it speaks to the exact concern I have of a dental practice that was bought out by a private equity company. And the dentists and the dental assistants, whoever they were basically financially incentivized to recommend a whole bunch of dental procedures. And they were actually penalized if they didn't. So it's kind of like it's a basic sales technique, right? And you sort of like, if you don't, try to upsell your customer, then, you get penalized, right? So when you're on the phone with someone, they're like, oh, would you like to also?
Yeah, it's like when you buy a car and it's like you go to see the finance guy, and the finance guy do you want the undercoating? Yeah.
Well, if you don't do this, your car is going to die next year. It's
you want the extended warranty? Do you want gap insurance?
Yeah, and you know what? They're selling me a car. It's kind of shame on me if I fall for it, right? But this story was about a little kid in a rural area who had, I can't remember what it was, but basically they did root canals throughout all his mouth, and he died.
Oh no.
The dental procedures were so invasive that he died from it. And the family is suing this private equity company because there's a very clear tie to the policies, incentives, and penalties they put in place for the staff to be recommending procedures.
Oh, that's heartbreaking.
Now, we're not getting those drastic, levels of tragedy here, but boy, that sounds a lot like every kid needs 40 hours a week of ABA. And if you don't agree with that, you're getting fired. So that's the kind of mentality that I just think everybody needs to be aware of, and they need to call it out if they see it. And I feel like if the field does that as a whole, everything will adapt because they have to, and frankly, because they can. But if nobody says anything, why should they? That's sort of my approach. So I feel like we're making progress there.
Very
That's
good.
why I'm not posting on LinkedIn as much anymore.
I see.
I don't have that much more to say at this point.
Well, you could post. You could post about other things that are cool.
Yeah, I'll definitely post about this episode.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. We got to post that AZA donate button too.
Yeah, sure.
Is it?
Yeah.
So we will definitely do that in the show notes of the episode. I forgot to bring that up earlier. All right. Well, this has been a really fun conversation. I know we've covered a lot of ground. It's remarkable the work that you and your team have done, and man, I appreciate you taking the time to tell that story. And I think it's a really interesting one, a unique perspective, certainly. And I was wondering if you can close out the show. I know you've already given a lot of food for thought for listeners and things like that. If you have any additional advice that you'd like to leave, whether it's the newly minted BCBA, you've certainly given me a lot of things to think about, and I'm far from newly minted. So any parting words or advice you want to leave us with, I'll give you the final word.
Yeah, I would say that anybody who works in this field and does so with integrity and a desire to help people, just remember that we are the keepers of the flame, right? It is up to us to uphold standards of practice for all organizational types. And I find that these three things kind of embody the standards that everybody should be looking for in any provider organization. Number one are the individualizing treatment. And there's many ways you can define that, but make sure it aligns with your values to whatever that means. Number two, are they empowering families? Are they giving them a voice in their own child's care and their own family's needs? Because that's critical. And number three, are they protecting access to care? Are they doing things that make it easier for families to get services? Or are they threatening the sort of future sustainability of the field? And obviously, we want to protect all the great work we've done as a field. So individualized treatment, empower families, and protect access to care. I think if you're a new BCBA, my advice would be to talk to as many experienced BCBAs as you can, especially ones that are not trying to recruit you. And just try to get those unbiased opinions and kind of honest descriptions of their different experiences. It doesn't mean you'll have to agree with everything they say or follow the paths they've taken, but learn from those who have come before you, who have been through a very turbulent time in this field. Some who have taken the bait and gone for the big money and the high profile role, only to find that the grass is not greener on the other side, or some that have found this is great and this is way better than where I was before. That's fine. Get all those opinions, but try to get those unbiased opinions from experienced people in a variety of roles and areas and things like that. And then just, take your time. Don't think of your career in the long term. Don't just jump at a job opportunity that offers a great salary. If it's expecting you to do more than you feel you're qualified to do, that's a red flag, and that it's not going to be good for you, because if you're set up fail, you will eventually no longer have that job, and it'll be tough to get another one. You want to set yourself up for success, so be realistic about the phase you're at in your career, the skills, and seek out the opportunities to develop the skills that you want to have. Find a place that will support you in doing that, rather than trying to jump right to the top of the mountain. Even we hear stories of new BCBAs starting their own practice as soon as they get their certification. You might be able to get away with that, but unless you're extremely lucky, that is very risky. And if it doesn't work out, it's going to be hard and weird to go back to another company and say, "Hey, can I just be a regular BCBA?" And then it's like, well, you probably think you know more than everybody else, so no thanks. I think it's just best to be humble about where you are and seek out the opportunity that feels right. And then the last thing is, just don't have your blinders on about ABA. This is not the only effective treatment for autism. I think that the field has suffered for a long time from excessive hubris in that sense, and it's caused us a lot of problems with other disciplines not liking us, not wanting to work with us. I think this is one of the areas I'm feeling really good about. I'm seeing a lot more collaboration. As I mentioned, it's something we focus on a lot here. I'm of the opinion that each discipline has their expertise, and we should all be able to benefit from that expertise. And the behavioral sciences offer a whole lot that is great, but it doesn't have to be everything to everyone. So the future of services in my mind is interdisciplinary and it's collaborative. And so if you're in the field, that's the mentality I suggest that you take.
All right. Those are excellent pieces of advice to leave us with. So Aaron, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Matt. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Behavioral Observations podcast with Matt Sikoria. You can find Matt's notes on this episode at www.behavioralobservations.com. We also invite you to stay connected with us on Facebook at facebook.com/behavioral observations and on Twitter at Behavior Podcast.